a sense for what is driving assisted suicide. So Evangeline is going to talk a lot about the nuts and bolts of where we are and what the state battles look like. The Patients' Rights Action Fund is a secular, nonpartisan organization. So we don't operate in the same way as our colleagues who are kind of your normal pro-life organization. I work every day with people who are far right. I mean, as far right as maybe people who resonate with people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, as well as people who are, like there's a guy north of San Francisco. They, them, actual anarchists would overthrow the government if you had a chance. Hard left. These are all people in between who oppose assisted suicide. Okay, so our side is able to, unlike on some other issues, the social issues of our time, it's not been pigeonholed. So you don't have the situation where, oh, here comes the pro-lifers again, or here comes the church again. Our side is very diverse, more diverse than basically any other issue going today. And you can reach across and hold hands with somebody that you disagree with vehemently on almost everything else, and convince legislators from every stripe to vote no. You can convince journalists who have had a previous misconception about their own position on the issue, and you can, I think, win the issue because of those things. So it's not going to be a slam dunk, but we don't also have a Hail Mary pass either. Right? So what's driving the issue? The other side, I think a lot of times people think like, oh, it's just the left. It's not just the left. So the left, as many people often conceive it, is very diverse in itself. And so we have many allies on the left. Our lawyers that we hired to sue the state of California to overturn the assisted suicide law here, they're as left as the day is long. They're doing lawsuits on pro-LGBTQ, pro-abortion, blah, 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 and they want to abolish assisted suicide laws. They're based in San Francisco. Okay, so what is it that is driving those who do want it? And are they all on the left? And the answer is no, they're not all on the left. In fact, there are Republicans who co-sponsor the bill and vote yes on the bills in various states. But there are also pro-abortion Democrats who vote no on bills. So what is it that's driving the ones who vote yes, and why are they motivated in that way if it's not about some kind of worldview that they held previously? This issue is very personal. It doesn't have to do with oftentimes somebody's their original way of thinking about life. It's often about an experience that they had. Those who are the soft proponents usually have had somebody who passed away in their life who died a terrible death. And they don't want that for themselves or anybody else. And they're also often really, really strong on autonomy and the individual's ability to govern, the self-government. Okay? But what's really driving all this is a fear and loathing of disability. This isn't about this idea that we're gonna make it a nice soft death, or people get more choices. What they're really like, if you distill everything down, they'll say those things out front, but what they really are saying in the end is, I do not want to be disabled. I actually fear and loathe people who are disabled. And when I say disabled, I mean it in the way that the ADA means it. It's very broad. It's not so much just like I can't walk, I can't see, I can't hear. It's things as diverse as ALS, diabetes, cancer itself is a disability, under the ADA. We as a society in the Euro-American West fear death, so much so that we don't ever want to talk about it. But if what we're really talking about with this issue and many others in healthcare is we are devaluing some people. Some people are considered worth less, which is why with assisted suicide laws, if I were a California resident and Alex and I go into a doctor and we both say, I want you to help me kill myself. If she's non-disabled and he writes her a lethal script, the guy's going to jail, her family's going to sue, and he's going to lose his license. Now, if I happen to have, say, let's say something as simple as diabetes, I operate where I write as a patient to forego care, I get off my insulin in order to qualify for lethal drugs, that guy can write me a script with complete impunity. All the usual protections go out the window. And why? Why is that the case? It's the case because we as a society actually think that some people aren't worth as much as other people. And many people have internalized that for themselves. So my own mother, she will say like, well, I'm not crippled. I can do this myself. Or she resists having the disabilities that she does have until we really impress upon her that interdependence is the human condition. All right, so if we are treating Alex in a different way than we treat me in that scenario, what's the main differentiator? Why is it that some of society is okay with one of us checking out and the other one not? It's disability. You listen to these people go into the hearings and they drill down and they're like, well, why is it that you would want to, it's not about the pain. The pain, the rationale of pain, physical pain, is in the 25th percentile of all those asking for lethal drugs. In the 90th percentile, it's like, I don't want to, or I fear, or I feel like I have lost my dignity. When you ask them what that means, it's like, well, I can't go to the bathroom independently anymore. It's like, wait a minute. You need somebody to help you wipe yourself, and now you want to kill yourself. But that's what our society says. If you are not productive, if you are not perfectly able, you're worth less. And that manifests itself in various ways. So assisted suicide is really only one of those ways in which we're willing to treat people with disabilities in a different way than we treat everybody else. The standard of care, being a medical professional, if somebody in my care, even in their home, expresses a desire to harm or kill themselves, and I don't do something about it, I don't initiate the standard of care for harm and suicide prevention care and services, I am personally liable, and so is my organization. Except if I'm in a legal state. If I'm in a legal state, now, if that person happens to have a life-threatening disability and I help them along the path to kill themselves, I'll do it. This manifests itself in other ways, right? So during the pandemic, there were crisis standards of care that were promulgated by states that would say things like, well, if somebody's, this is a rationing protocol. If somebody's got severe mental retardation and they don't get the ventilator, deprioritize because of disability. In Italy, they wouldn't even let you in the door of the hospital if you were over 75 during the pandemic. Not allowed. Right, so, in some single-payer systems and managed care systems, they'll use things like the quality adjusted life year. This is a metric by which people with disabilities are deprioritized for healthcare dollars in order to make the whole system work. It's not just assisted suicide. This is a kind of a cultural, a deep sense that we need to talk. We have to have a conversation about mere humanity. I think most people that come to this conference are Christians. So most people will probably know C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. We're way beyond that. We have to kind of take 100 steps backwards and begin talking about mere humanity if if we're going to get anywhere on these issues. It's not, assisted suicide is just kind of like the tip of the iceberg. You can see it, it's really terrible, you know, it's like shocking, you know, that they're, you know, somebody's poor in Canada, and guess what, like the duress of poverty and one physical disability, no matter what it is, they could have a hangnail and they get approved for euthanasia. Now that's not a real example, but a kid who was blind in one eye, but he was extremely clinically depressed. The blindness allowed him to be approved for euthanasia. He killed himself, right? 19 years old, right? If we're there, we need to take 10, 100 steps back and say, what's on the baseline here? The baseline is every single human being is worth as much as every other single human being. And everybody can agree on that, right, left, or indifferent. So I suggest that as we kind of go forth into the world, I would kind of like encourage you two things. One is have good hope, because at least on this issue, it's winnable. And people are beginning to see the light. The scales are falling off. People are asking like hard questions from every political sphere. Two is that take those 100 steps back and begin speaking to people about and thinking about the world in a way where you have to kind of think about the truth as the baseline and start there with mere humanity and encourage people by asking them a very basic question. Do you think every person is worth the same as every other person? And if the answer is yes, then it cannot follow that we treat this set of people differently when they express a desire to harm or kill themselves than when we treat those people. So I think that's going to be a good time to transfer over there.
I think your time zone. That was excellent, Matt. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for setting the context for this whole issue. I'm going to take a look at what's been happening in the legislatures in terms of legalizing physician-assisted suicide. What has happened so far this year, what are some things that we can do at the state level to combat physician-assisted suicide. So to start off, I do work for Americans United for Life, which is a pro-life law and policy organization, nonpartisan, non-religious, and we are committed to educating people about the life issues, letting them understand what the laws are. We track legislation. Anyone can use our website to find out the status of bills that are in play in the state legislatures. And then we also get involved a little bit on the litigation side, but our primary emphasis, I would say, would be in legislative work. So we develop model bills that can be used to protect life. We do all the life issues, and so these end-of-life issues are part of our regular work. So right now, basically we're talking about this movement to legalize physician involvement in suicide is a phenomenon that has been going on for about 30 years. And at this point, we now have, there are 11 jurisdictions, which include 10 states and the District of Columbia, that have legalized physician-assisted suicide. And many of those have been actually like in the last, 5 to 7 years. So that we have had this, a rash of states. And these efforts are ongoing and relentless. One thing that you'll find is that when bills get introduced into states on the issue and they fail to advance during the legislative session, they're often brought back year after year after year. Hearings are held year after year. Testimony is taken. And the persistence of the suicide activists has resulted, in some cases, in their being able to successfully get their bills passed, and sometimes they're defeated. So I'm just going to list you the states where physician-assisted suicide is legal, and those include California, Colorado, Washington, D.C., Hawaii, Maine, Montana. Montana, was not a result of a legislator passing a law, but it was a judicial determination, and really an example of judicial activism. New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington State. So you may know that, for example, Oregon is one of the most notorious states for physician-assisted suicide, and actually suicide tourism is available there. And they legalized physician-assisted suicide in Vermont in 1997, so that was the first state. If we take a look at what has happened this year, it's a mixed bag. We have both good news and bad news. One great victory for our side is that Indiana passed a pro-life physician-assisted suicide bill, which was a resolution condemning physician-assisted suicide for that state. So we're very pleased that we did have that victory. Something that we want to keep our eyes out and follow and hopefully get involved in some way is that in West Virginia, there's going to be a ballot initiative this fall on whether whether West Virginia wants to put an amendment to their state constitution that would prohibit physician-assisted suicide. So this is a really important initiative because just like in the case of abortion, where once Roe v. Wade was overturned and there was no federal constitutional right to abortion, the same thing is there are efforts by some in the suicide activist crowd to try to invent and create and find a state right to, in their state constitutions, a right to assisted suicide. So one thing that states can do is to combat this with passing resolutions that and also inserting new protections in their own state constitutions. So we want to keep our eye on West Virginia and help out there where we can. Another interesting thing that's still pending is Delaware. So Delaware, this legislative session, did initially defeat a physician-assisted suicide bill, but then they were able to reintroduce it, and it did pass both houses in the state of Delaware. It now has gone to the governor, and we don't know the outcome of that yet. However, previously, the Delaware governor said he would veto it. So we don't. So we're waiting to find out what's going to happen in Delaware. One thing that's happening that is a real concern is that most of the states that do have legalized physician-assisted suicide are able to get those laws passed because they say we have a bunch of safeguards in here. And therefore, we're not going to just casually allow doctors to participate by giving drugs to patients. We're going to have all these safeguards about 2 doctors have to sign on it. There has to be a waiting period and so forth and so on. But what we have seen is that in the states that have legalized physician-assisted suicide, many of them are now, after they've had it a few years or something, and now what they're doing is trying to amend their physician-assisted suicide laws to make them more accessible. So they're reducing the waiting periods. They are, in some cases even waiving those waiting periods and so forth. So, that weakens the argument that safeguards, there are many flaws with safeguards. And for example, all the states that have passed physician-assisted suicide do require 2 witnesses, or 2 people to certify that the person is competent. But only one of those witnesses has to be someone who doesn't have a financial stake or a personal connection. But there's no requirement that both of them be in that situation. So that, of course, puts these vulnerable people at risk of coercion, pressure, and being forced to think they have a duty to die or they don't want to be a burden or whatever. So that's something, a trend that we need to watch, that even in the states that have passed physician-assisted suicide bills, and a good example of that was Colorado this year in 2024. They did expand their physician-assisted suicide law by reducing the waiting period from 15 days to 7, by waiving it in some circumstances, the waiting period, and allowing advanced practice nurses to do the evaluations and prescribe the lethal drugs. So overall, there were 10 states this year that introduced physician-assisted suicide bills, and 9 states that carried them over from 2023. And as of the end of May, and most legislative sessions take place in the spring of a calendar year, but all states can set their own legislative schedules and calendars. But anyway, as of the end of May, there were a number of physician-assisted suicide bills that were defeated. They were defeated in Arizona, in Florida, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Maryland, Minnesota, Missouri, New Hampshire, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. So we're glad about that. And then something very kind of interesting happened. The battle against physician-assisted suicide is primarily a state issue, but because states have broad power to protect their citizens and govern concerning health and safety requirements. But there is a role at the federal government to address these issues, and there are things that the federal government can do. But one thing that happened this year, this is not a good thing, there were 2 U.S. representatives who introduced a bill which is called the Patient Access to End-of-Life Care Act, and that's designed to amend a 1997 law that prohibits federal spending on physician-assisted suicide. And so they wanted to carve out an exception and remove that restriction in the case of physician-assisted suicide. That the federal law prohibits, also with respect to euthanasia and other kinds of funding. But so we do have, there is movement at the federal level, and I don't think that bill's going to go anywhere. This can go anywhere anytime soon. But we need to be on the alert that legislation can be at play at the federal level in addition to the states. So I just wanted to end my comments with what can we do at the state level? At least, of course, we need to do all the things that Matt talked about in terms of public education, talking to people, explaining what those issues are. And I think the appeals to our concern for discrimination against vulnerable people, against disabled people, very powerful way to talk about the issue. But legislatively, what we can do is we can pass, but not only combat and try to oppose physician-assisted suicide bills, which is kind of on being on the defense, but we can also affirmatively enact various kinds of laws. So Americans United for Life, we developed these model bills. We have 4 model bills concerning this issue, and they range from things like just a ban. This state, we ban physician-assisted suicide in this state. That would be great. That's a good one. Then we also have a couple of resolutions that are helpful. For example, just to state that it is the state's policy to oppose physician-assisted suicide. There's another one that would be helpful that's also kind of a resolution that would be helpful. It would say something like, no state laws no state laws in our state can be read to authorize or approve of physician-assisted suicide. And that can be helpful when you have a situation like we did in Montana, where you have judicial determination or invention of a right to physician-assisted suicide under a state law. So there are things that we can do proactively, and the legislative arena is a really important one for these battles. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to, the ballot initiative in West Virginia, we may be seeing more and more of that. Some of the laws that do exist already did pass by ballot initiatives originally. They weren't all through legislatures. So that's my wrap up on state legislation. And thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I did the PowerPoint because it helps keep me track of we have limited time. But I wanted to go back to what Matt said about dignity and the fact that we are all, we cannot treat some people as different classes of people with different rights than other people. So, and I want to talk about this because obviously the word dignity has been co-opted, has been deconstructed to mean something exactly the opposite of what it actually is. So the dictionary definition is the quality or state of being worthy, honored, or esteemed, which implies that we have to do something to achieve it. We have to be something, do something, accomplish something. That is not the Christian understanding of dignity. So the Catholic Church teaches that dignity is based on the fact that we are created in the image and likeness of God, which means that this is an undeserved gift. It is not an earned status. There's nothing we can do to be more, have more dignity or less dignity, because it's not us that, we are not the cause of our dignity. We have dignity because we're created in the image of God. So, and this was something that was reiterated by Pope John Paul II following the Terri Schiavo case. Are you all familiar with what happened with Terri Schiavo, where she was starved and dehydrated to death in order to have her die with dignity? So, and this is actually a family that we represented. This is Juan and his mother. Juan's wife sought, similar to the Terri Schiavo case, sought to take him home without food and water because he was disabled. So, and again, Pope John Paul II reiterated that we do not earn our dignity. It doesn't matter how seriously ill we may be, how seriously disabled we may be, we all retain that same human dignity in all its fullness. So then what does death with dignity, to die with dignity, mean? This is directly from the Death with Dignity movement's own documents. It's a fundamental freedom of choice and end-of-life options. It's the greatest human freedom is to determine when we live or die, which completely disregards the fact that we cannot create ourselves, nor do we really have the right to end our lives. And it's a gift of control. So basically what they're saying is that dignity means autonomy, choice, and control. That's how they redefine dignity. And then we also have to consider that from a Christian perspective, dignity is not just about, we're not just a pile of bones, we have an eternal soul, and we need to look at the effect of suffering and the potential even benefits, it's hard to say that, but the benefits of suffering on our eternal soul. And as Paul said, we endure the suffering for a moment in light of a greater glory that awaits us. So I want to talk a little bit about California's assisted suicide law, which is called the End-of-Life Option. Notice option, not options, act, one option. In order to qualify or to receive a prescription for lethal drugs, the patient has to sign an affidavit or attest to these facts that they are seeking to end their life in a humane and dignified manner. And again, you can see how this word dignity is used to persuade people that this is actually the dignified option. To endure suffering is undignified, which again completely contravenes millennia of Christian teaching. And then, as if that were not enough, because assisted suicide furthers human dignity, allegedly, California passed a law, SB 380, a couple of years ago, to force every doctor to be complicit in this. And so what the law requires is 2 oral requests for the assisted suicide drugs, or the legal garbage, but and even doctors who did not participate or did not want to participate in assisted suicide, if their patients made an oral request and said, I would like assisted suicide drugs, they had to note that in the patient's chart, and that was considered one of those 2 requests. So it forced doctors to be complicit in assisted suicide. But as Matt said, this is a winnable issue. So we, along with ADF, I want to get back to this in a minute. We, along with ADF, sued the state, and we actually won. And this provision that would have required doctors to participate in assisted suicide was permanently enjoined. There are critical issues here. I just don't want people to be completely and then compassionate choices, which is like the Planned Parenthood of the Death with Dignity movement. This is how they urge people to talk to their physicians about assisted consequences if I am no longer able to find dignity in my life. Again, reflecting a complete misunderstanding of what human dignity actually is. I want to talk now very briefly about another form of euthanasia. So assisted suicide is one form of euthanasia, but what we see very often is a passive euthanasia, where somebody is denied essential life-sustaining care. And this all falls under the same umbrella because, again, we're talking about pushing this idea, or instituting this idea of death with dignity, that this is now the norm in the way that they define dignity. So control over your own circumstances of your death. So this is, I'm just going to highlight a couple of the cases that we've had. This is Tuesday, her name is Tuesday. Tuesday had a severe asthma attack. She has obviously severe asthma, had a severe asthma attack resulting in loss of oxygen to her brain that resulted in her being on a ventilator, completely dependent on a feeding tube for nutrition and hydration. The doctors encouraged her boyfriend, this is Jesse, encouraged her boyfriend to discontinue all care, that she would never breathe again, she would just be a quote-unquote vegetable, which is a horrible term to use for a human being anyway, and just to basically let her die with dignity. He said no. He actually called us. We had to sue the hospital to get them to back off. And Tuesday is now, she's able to breathe on her own. She can feed herself now. She's learning how to speak again. She has a road ahead of her, but all the things that the doctor said would happen did not happen, did not materialize. So, and we've seen a lot of cases like this. For example, this is Tabitha, kind of a similar story, although she had a heart attack at 32. Within 3 days, she was put in hospice care with no food, and she did get water because she was an organ donor, and that's a whole different story that we'll talk about another. But in any case, got no food, and her boyfriend also called us. And a lot of times it's the boyfriends or the fiancés who call us because they have no legal standing to challenge the hospital's decision making. So he called us and he said, something doesn't seem right because she seems to be getting better, but they're still not feeding her. At one point, she actually asked for a sausage breakfast sandwich, and they would not feed her. They would not feed her. So we had to report again, and she ended up making a full recovery when I went to visit her. I didn't believe these things, so I would fly across the country to visit these patients because I was like, this can't be happening. Similarly, this is another one of our clients who was incapacitated because of a stroke. She was 39 years old. At the time, they put her in hospice, same thing, no food. And under this doctrine of futility of care, which says that giving patients treatment that is not going to be beneficial in somebody's very subjective view violates their dignity. Well, I would argue that giving somebody food and water may not cure their brain injury, but it will keep them alive and give them the opportunity to have their brain injury, potentially have them recover from their brain injury. And this woman actually did make a full recovery, and this was, I went to visit her during the hearing where she could, her guardianship hearing, where she had a court-appointed guardian, and then she wanted to just be independent again, and was successful in doing that. But again, we had to sue the hospital, and this I wanted to point out because this was actually a Catholic hospital that took away her food. And again, this is Pope John Paul II. If you have not read his address to the International Congress regarding life-sustaining treatments and patients in a quote-unquote vegetative state, I would highly recommend it because he talks about food and water being morally obligatory. This is not optional care, this is ordinary care. And then if you want to know how to protect yourself and your loved ones, we have guidance on advanced healthcare directives, and I know I think you have some of that as well, so Matt does as well. I would strongly encourage you to inform yourselves as far as how to protect yourself with a well-written advanced directive.
The biggest thing on that is honestly just making sure that proxies that you put in place really know, and you 100% trust them to make those decisions. So having all the conversations, and I don't know much research kind of, I imagine, Alex read it, that's the kind of thing that he thinks through all of the possible scenarios and what would be commensurate with your own values.
Yeah.
So for us, we have an actual advance directive that we created for each of the assisted suicide legal states that's free and downloadable. We got a grant to do this. Now, there are lots of good advance directives out there, but for somebody who can afford it, or we may provide these.
We provide guidance on how to fill it out, and basically just encouraging people to select all the care possible. And as you said, have that conversation. And I would also say, don't ever, if you're watching a movie like $1 Million Baby or any movie that features somebody who has a disability, never ever say the words, "I never want to be in that condition," because we saw that in Juan's case. That was used against him. To say, well, he wouldn't have wanted to be in this condition. Well, nobody wants to be in that condition, but that's not the choice at that time. The choice is not between living a healthy life and then having a disability. The choice is between life and death at that point. So, and we wanted, like I said, we wanted to leave some time open for questions. So, if you have any, go ahead.
I have a question. So, I do pharmaceutical benefit consulting, and I met, and we spoke on a similar issue a few months back. And we talked about the medications. The medications are a drug cocktail, right? But they're not watched by the pharmacy. They're not going to be seen, right? They're low cost. You get it for $50. You get all 4 medications. And so we put in clinical edits so that employers were paying for it. We want to talk about legislation. A lot of legislation, you talk about, we want to make it compulsory that these are provided. That usually comes to employee benefits, right? Rights to abortion, rights to other care. Could we not write legislation that the state shall not regulate, impose, or coerce an employer to provide benefits that would result in the death of one of their employees or an employee's dependent? In other words, taking an offensive instead of a defensive approach to it.
That's a great idea. Yeah, that's a great idea too. Of course, requirements, on insurance and coverage, health insurance is pretty much controlled at the state level, so yes.
Exactly. And 80% of medications that are dispensed are through employer benefits.
Yeah.
Right? But if it goes like the ACA, well, all of a sudden that's being mandated onto the states. What I want is that if we had something in there that says, no, we're not going to force our employers to try to take out their own employees, especially with children. Because the ACA says you can be dependent on your parents' plans to 26, but HIPAA says those kids never have to, and their doctors told the parents what happened. A father could find out that he contributed to a health plan that actually took his own child's life.
Yeah, I think it would have to be pretty carefully crafted, and the lawyers in the room would know better than I, but I've just seen it time and again where, especially with assisted suicide laws, all kinds of other protections like that are basically written out of so in the assisted suicide statute, they basically get around all of them. And then in subsequent statutes, they say, we have all these protections except for this thing. They cut it out.
Right, and I'm trying to get in front of the money, because I think money drives a lot of this. You say, well, people cost more, they cost health plans more, they cost hospital, and the reason then the money's not there. Maine and Canada's made that very, very clear that they'll reckon anybody who's got that call.
Yeah, in fact, one of the Canadian universities did a study to determine how much the single-payer system was saving. It was like $150 million. That's just growing because they keep having more and more of the percentages of death and caused by euthanasia.
And I had a question for you, Matt. We talked about Oregon, and I had done some research on it. And so these were the number of prescriptions that were given. 6,000, I'll pull a number out. 4,500 adjusted, which tells me that's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of buyers or remorse people who went out and actually had the script filled, took it home and said, hey, that's telling me there's a lot of pressure. These are people desperately trying to get it. There's people pressuring saying, hey, make things better for the family or the doctors or whatever, and then actually confront them, they don't want to. I'd love to see those people have to stand in front of the judge.
Yeah, so what the other side will say is that we want this for peace of mind. So it's actually one of their talking points. They got this from I'm sure, doing focus groups and polling and research to figure out what to say exactly. And the thing that they have, the ones who are trained by Compassionate Choices to be speakers will say, I want this for my peace of mind. I may or may not use it, but it gives me peace to have the option. And so there may be some people that have the buyer's remorse. The kind of concerning thing to me, over and above the fact that doctors kill themselves and family members are coercing others, like that's obviously the big fat sin. It's like, I mean, we put doctors in jail who are just trying to help their patients not have as much pain when they're prescribing therapeutic doses. Mm-hmm. The dose, so among the current in vogue drug cocktail, there's a dose of morphine that's part of the cocktail that's 1,000 times, 1,000 times the therapeutic dose. It's walking out of the CVS in any legal state with no oversight, zero. And then those people don't use the drugs, and how much is that worth on the street, and who's going to use it instead of grandma?
Right. And how many pharmacy techs realize that that's what's their hand over the counter to somebody, especially when it's
No,
40 for prescriptions.
they know exactly what's happening, but come on. You usually put this much morphine in, and all of a sudden you're like, here you go, bud. You know what you're doing. Come on. Many pharmacists won't participate for this.
Right, and that's one where the Catholic Pharmacy Association is trying to get that education out, especially to see, we see 3 of the 4 drugs were issued last month, and now we're doing the 4th one this month. And I have an automatic stoppage. And saying, what is this for? And then the pharmacist will say that.
Yeah, I mean, a litigation opportunity for what's legal might be that in Vermont it was explicitly left out that pharmacists were not immune from prosecution. So there's only 3 in the whole state that will actually write the script, right? So in many of the other statutes, it's not actually clear whether or not pharmacy, but you can test that.
Yeah.
You could basically say, like, okay, we're going to find somebody who's willing to sue a pharmacist over writing the script, see if California, if that will fly here. And then all of a sudden, you threaten legal action on every pharmacy in the state, and there'd be very few that actually will write.
Well, and this is why we have to get ahead of creating a right to this, because it's very difficult to then even invoke conscience protections when the other side is saying, well, now there's a constitutional right to have this, and to avail yourself of this.
This seems like a pretty simple question, but should we be, as a country, should it be legal to help people kill themselves? Is there an opportunity? It seems like Evangeline, the Supreme Court is pretty favorable to common sense.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, there's a Supreme
opportunity?
Court decision that just said there is no constitutional right to assisted suicide. So,
Yes, the other side took a case back in the late 90s.
Yeah.
Those cases were consolidated in
Yeah.
the Supreme Court 9-0. You don't have a right to those.
there is no right.
Now, there is an opportunity, which we've begun to pursue, of suing the states that have passed the law based on anti-discrimination. So if we're treating a protected class in a different way than we're treating everybody else when they express that they're going to kill themselves in a medical setting, that's classic discrimination. So if the lawsuit we filed here in California is successful at the Ninth Circuit, where it currently is, you would ultimately have Washington, Oregon, Hawaii, and California. The laws would flip over. So we wouldn't have that in these states anymore. We're currently preparing a second lawsuit in another circuit, so you can get that circuit split and see whether. So the one case said you don't have a constitutional right to this. We want them to say you actually can't have these laws because of federal anti-discrimination law. So we could ultimately end up in the next 5 years with assisted suicide being banned because it's inherently discriminatory.
Unless they say that everyone can do it.
Well, you could say, the argument that I'm waiting for the state of California to make is that this is a reasonable accommodation. And if they say that, it just kind of like blows out of the water everything that the other side always says. It's not about a disability, of course it's about disability.
And I will say, I don't think we should also just rely on litigation or even legislation. So much of this is public opinion that's driving this. And I am always shocked when I talk to people who share my faith, who we have a lot of the same beliefs on abortion, who will say, well, you know, who am I to say the person is suffering? I don't want to. People are very swayed by these emotional arguments, and so, which is really incumbent upon all of us, and why I appreciate the Napa Institute so much to kind of educate people on, you know, basic fundamental issues like what Matt was talking about, just how we treat human beings. We cannot treat human beings this way. We cannot say it's okay for some people to be disposable in this way. So, and again, that's something that all of us really need to be dealing with.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, with respect to polling, so as always, the answers you get are going to be based on the questions that you've asked. And so when the suicide activists come in and cite polls, the majority of the people in this state favor this. It's all because of the way in which they go, you know, the polling that they did, the kinds of questions that they asked. And, you know, do you think people should have a right to discuss with their doctor, you know, end-of-life options, which would include assistance, medical, you know, aid in dying, if the person can freely, you know, is capable of making that decision and it has a terminal diagnosis and so forth and so on. So, and people, the general public hasn't really necessarily thought through the implications of this or the underlying assumptions. They don't have the context of the pressure that's applied on vulnerable people when, you know, they now are afraid that they're a burden to their family, they're costing their family money, now their own doctor is has given up on them, and so they go, well, I guess I'm just going to do this. So we have a whole lot to do with public education. But back to your question about it is illegal in almost all states and in almost all Western democracies to assist a suicide. That is a crime, to assist a suicide. What's happening with these physician-assisted suicide laws is they are doing an exception to that general law that, it's illegal to assist a person commit suicide. And they're saying, well, physician-assisted suicide is an exception, and it's for this limited circumstance where a person, you know, it has a terminal diagnosis, and we have all these safeguards and so forth and so on. So it is illegal in most states and in most countries, most Western countries, democracies, to assist a suicide. The penalties for that.
Thank you.
And yeah, make no mistake about it, the assisted suicide law is just what we've seen just in the last 5 years in terms of how they are eliminating the quote. So there are no safeguards, but I mean, what they say to be the safeguards are now being eliminated. We are moving rapidly towards active euthanasia. So, I realize our time is up. Thank you so much, but I'll be here. I think you guys can be here if anybody else has any questions or comments or anything.
Thank you so much.